Order. Order. Just before we begin the debate, members should feel free to remove jackets if they wish because of the temperature. I now call Rob Butler to move the motion. Mr Butler.
Thank you, Mr Robertson. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I beg to move the motion in my name on the order paper. Mr Robertson, when I was 15 years old, I wrote to BBC Radio Oxford saying that they should make programmes for teenagers. Their reply offered me the chance to make those programmes myself, and thus began my career in broadcasting. After I graduated, I worked for BBC News for 7 years before moving to Channel 5, where I stayed for another 8 years. So I declare an interest, of a background in broadcasting, and a considerable period working for the BBC itself. One of the things that made BBC Radio Oxford great when I was there was its connection to the audience. Its presenters, reporters and producers really knew the local area, they understood the local issues and they related to the local people. And that is the case now for the Oxford television newsroom that produces dedicated programming in South Today each evening. The title sequence shows the names of the places that feature: Abingdon, Bicester, Brackley, Buckingham, Didcot, Witney and, of course, Aylesbury, my constituency. The Oxford programme has a dedicated presenter and a dedicated team of journalists who produce dedicated programming for their local audience. Yet that programming is now under threat. At the end of May, the BBC announced that it will end the local TV bulletins broadcast from Oxford on BBC One at 6:30 p.m. and 10:30 p.m. on weekdays. From November, regional coverage for the area will be merged with the South Today programme broadcast from Southampton. Instead of TV news in my area, the BBC says it will be strengthening its local online news services. The BBC has decided to do the same with its bulletins currently produced in Cambridge, scrap the TV programme and put the local news online instead. And I know there are colleagues here today who are affected by that particular decision. Now, Mr Robertson, the BBC has a unique and privileged place in our country. It is funded by a licence fee that is imposed on everybody who owns a television set, irrespective of how much they earn or how much BBC output they watch, listen to or read. In return for that funding model, the BBC is governed by a royal charter that sets out the corporation's responsibilities. The charter lists the public purposes of the BBC. First among them is, and I quote, "to provide impartial news and information to help people understand and engage with the world around them. The BBC should provide duly accurate and impartial news, current affairs and factual programming to build people's understanding of all parts of the United Kingdom and of the wider world. Its content should be provided to the highest editorial standards. It should offer a range and depth of analysis and content not widely available from other United Kingdom news providers, using the highest calibre presenters and journalists and championing freedom of expression, so that all audiences can engage fully with major local, regional, national, United Kingdom and global issues and participate in the democratic process at all levels as active and informed citizens." That is the first purpose listed under the Charter. Now, Mr Robertson, this debate is not the place to discuss how fully the BBC complies with everything set out in that paragraph. There are certainly different views about how well it complies with the requirement to be impartial, for example. But I want to draw the attention of this House to certain key elements of this first of the public purposes of the BBC. It is to provide news to build people's understanding of all parts of the United Kingdom and should enable all audiences to engage fully with major local issues and offer material not widely available from other UK news providers. Mr Robertson, I submit that with its proposal to close the Oxford edition of South Today and the Cambridge edition of Look East, the BBC is failing to comply with those charter requirements. The BBC needs to continue providing local news in the way people want to get it, because others have ceased to do so. Many local newspapers have closed in recent years. In August 2020, Press Gazette reported that, according to its analysis, 265 local newspapers had shut since 2005. Just last month, a report entitled Local News Deserts, published by the Charitable Journalism Project, set out a stark picture. It said, "The current local news landscape of the UK is unrecognisable compared to 25 years ago. Average daily print circulation for the local, regional and local press in 2019 was around 31% of the figure in 2007. The loss of revenue from print sales and the migration of advertising online has brought about successive shocks to the business model of local news. It's led to multiple title closures, redundancies, the hollowing out of newsrooms, office closures and centralisation. It says most local journalism is no longer written by separate editorial teams associated with a specific title. It goes on. People want a trusted, locally based, professional and accessible source of local news that reports and investigates local issues and institutions provided by journalists local to their communities. The chairman of the project wrote in his foreword, "The collapse of local reporting is a slow-burning crisis in Britain," and pointed out that the income which kept local newspapers afloat in the past will not return. That, then, is the picture for local print journalism. But it isn't just newspapers that are leaving town. In September 2020, Aylesbury's much-loved and very widely respected commercial radio station, Mix 96, effectively closed down. It was subsumed into a new regional station called Greatest Hits, Bucks, Beds and Hearts, owned by Bauer. The dedicated team who'd served Aylesbury with news, current affairs and local information were no more. The studios in our town have closed. Bauer promised that there would still be coverage of Aylesbury stories, but they are far fewer than they were before. The reporters, who then lived and worked locally, have gone. Now, Mr. Robertson, of course I recognise that the way we get our news is changing. Many of us use our phones, for example, to see updates on Twitter or Facebook. But there is still a sizable audience that wants to get its local news from a local television programme. And that is especially the case for older people. Indeed, the BBC itself says that 75% of the viewers to its South Today programme are over the age of 55. Now, whilst, of course, many people in that age bracket are highly digitally savvy, plenty of others are not. And they should not be cut off from what is happening in their local area. They should still have access to information about local news. They should still be able to see their local politicians being held to account on their television screens. Instead, as I mentioned, with its latest proposals, the BBC plans to subsume the news from Aylesbury into a programme from Southampton. Now, frankly, stories about sailing and the coast are not terribly relevant to one of the most inland towns in England. The simple truth is that people in Witney don't have a great deal in common with people in Winchester. News about the havoc caused by HS2 in Buckinghamshire is not very high on the agenda of those who live in Bembridge on the Isle of Wight. The BBC is proposing to create a TV region which simply has no geographical identity. The result will be even lower audiences as people tune out from a programme with stories they simply don't relate to. And this matters, Mr. Robertson. The broadcasting regulator, Ofcom, also highlights the importance of television as a source of news. Its most recent report on news consumption says TV remains the most common platform for accessing local news. In addition, use of TV is most prevalent amongst the 65-plus age group, while the internet is the most used platform for news consumption amongst 16 to 24s. BBC One, it says, remains the most used news source across any platform. It is twice as popular as the BBC website and app, 62% for TV, 31% for the online and app. Yet, the BBC wants to close its TV programmes and put the content online. And I'll just say a quick word here about radio, because the BBC says that when it closes its Oxford and Cambridge TV programmes, it'll devote more resource to its local radio stations. But Ofcom says that fewer than half the population now use the radio for news. It's just 46%, whereas 79% of people use television. So again, the BBC is knowingly cutting programmes from a platform it knows is used and relied upon. Now, Mr. Robertson, some may say that this government's decision to freeze the price of the BBC licence for 2 years has forced the corporation's hand. It is true that the BBC will have to make some cuts in some of its expenditure, but not in this case. The acting director of BBC England told me, in simple words, this isn't about savings. I haven't got to save a single penny. And in the correspondence I received from the BBC to tell me that they were planning to close the Oxford programme, it is confirmed the BBC will be maintaining its overall spend on local and regional content in England over the next few years. Let me repeat that. The planned closure of BBC Oxford South Today programme is not driven by the need to save money. Instead, the British Broadcasting Corporation wants to shift more of its output online and away from television. So, having been a journalist and always wanting to hear two sides of the BBC, two sides of the story, I went to the BBC to ask it to put its case. When I asked what evidence it had that people in my local area wanted to get their news online instead of on screen, I was told, oh, it'll take some time to gather all of that information from various sources. Now, this was from the director who had made the decision to close the service, so I was a bit surprised that he didn't actually have the facts at his fingertips and couldn't immediately tell me where was the justification why he felt it was needed or desired. But he couldn't, so I waited for this massive evidence from various sources to arrive. After 10 days, I got one page. It could not be said to provide the compelling facts that I had equally awaited. First, it set out some raw numbers. The BBC said the average number of viewers to South Today broadcast from Oxford was considerably lower in 2022 than in 2020. But in 2020, Mr. Robertson, all regional news programmes experienced a big increase in viewers because of the pandemic, a point proudly emphasised by the BBC itself in its annual report. So it is somewhat disingenuous to take that specific high point as a comparator to justify cuts now. And indeed, the BBC told me that the decrease in viewing to regional news programmes is happening more slowly than the decrease in viewing to other programmes. Then on this one page, there was a single paragraph that could perhaps be said to touch on digital versus traditional ways to get local news. This said that the BBC's own qualitative research showed, and I quote, amongst older respondents above 55, there has been a long-term trend away from traditional platforms, especially print media, and towards online sources, most significantly Facebook. The BBC added, this is supported by Ofcom data, which reveals over 55s are as likely to access news online as through radio or print. This group expects to be able to access tailored local news online. Those listening closely will have heard reference to print twice and radio once. But in the evidence the BBC provided me to support its decision to cut a television news programme, the word television is not mentioned. It certainly did not say that older viewers were switching away from TV news, let alone that they wanted to do so and get their local news online instead. In fact, it says that of the weekly visitors to BBC News online, 37% are aged 55 or older, in marked contrast to the 75% aged over 55 watching South Today. So there are serious concerns about older people being able to get easy access to increased online local news. And I should also mention that there is a threat to the jobs of those who've dedicated years of their lives to producing high-quality local TV news. They have not been guaranteed new posts, and they should not be forgotten. Mr. Robertson, the BBC is a British institution. It does a great deal of good for our country. I'm very proud to have worked there. Its role providing news and information is crucial to our democracy. But with its plans to cut dedicated news programmes on television in the Oxford and Cambridge areas, it will reduce access to local news and information for many people. For the reasons I've set out this morning, I believe that contravenes its charter requirements, and that is why I say it is not simply a day-to-day operational decision for the BBC, but why it is a matter for this House and the Government, and I look forward to the Minister's response.